Thank you, Natalie, and thank you especially for being here on short notice. I'm very grateful. There's a story, a Daoist story, about a farmer whose horse ran away. And after his horse ran away, all the neighbors came over that night and they said, "Oh, what terrible luck." But the farmer just said, "Maybe so, maybe not." Well, the next day that horse came back and he brought with him 6 wild horses. Wow! The neighbors came back that night, woohoo! What great luck! But the farmer just said, "Maybe so, maybe not." Well, the next day, the farmer's son went out and got on one of those wild horses to try to ride it, and of course he got bucked off and he broke his leg. And the neighbor said, "Oh, what a terrible misfortune." But the farmer said, "Maybe so, maybe not." So the next day, the conscription officers came, and these were the guys that were drafting young men to be in the army. And they saw that the farmer's son had a broken leg, and they just passed right on by. Wow. Now the neighbors were very excited, and they came over to the farmer's house again, and they said, "Isn't it just wonderful that everything turned out so fortunately?" But the farmer just said, "Maybe so, maybe not." Exactly. Well, I love this little story because it teaches us 3 very important lessons about change. And the first is that change is constant, right? And we know this. I mean, we know that everything changes, even though sometimes we wish it wouldn't. But that's just the river of life moving through our lives. And the second thing this story teaches us is that the way things look today is not necessarily the way they're going to look tomorrow, right? And what appears to be really good today may not look that good to us tomorrow. And conversely, something that seems like very bad fortune today may turn out to be a tremendous gift tomorrow. You know, the Japanese have a saying, they say, misfortune becomes a blessing. And I bet each and every one of you can think of a time in your life when something happened that you thought was awful, and by golly, you look back on it now and you think, oh, that was really a blessing. That actually worked to my good. And the third thing this little story shows us is 2 very different ways of relating to change. We can relate to change the way the farmer did, or we can relate to change the way the neighbors did. Now, I think most of us are pretty familiar with what it's like to respond the way the neighbors did, right? It's like one day, it's like, woo, the best thing ever happened to me in the world, I'm so excited. And the next day, it's, oh, I can't believe this happened. Oh, it's the end of the world, right? You're just riding these waves, and it's up and down and up and down. Whereas the farmer shows us another way. It's like the farmer has taken a step back from these things that are going on day to day, kind of have a bigger perspective about it all. Now, he's just really waiting and seeing, right? He's just going to wait and see how things unfold. It's as if he's experiencing these changes, but at the same time, he's observing them. And that helps him stay a little steadier through everything that happens. So that if we were to chart the emotional responses of the neighbors versus the farmer, the neighbors would look something like this, right? And the farmer would look a little bit more like this, or maybe more like this, you know, because he is experiencing something. It's not like he's a robot. There's ups and downs, but because he has kind of a more solid foundation of perspective and faith and wisdom, he's able to ride those out a little more gracefully. So let me ask you, which way would you rather live your life? Like this or like this? Well, I'm going to assume for the sake of the discussion today that you'd rather live it a little bit more like this. So how do we do that? Well, we can learn a lesson from the farmer because he really is showing us the value of keeping an eye on that bigger picture. Because when you see the bigger picture, You're not thrown into sort of the ups and downs as they come along. You're not immediately judging, is this good, is this bad, how should I react, that kind of thing. When you have that bigger perspective, you really know that even though we can't control everything in life that happens to us, we can control how we see it and how we respond. And so when we're able to keep things in that sense of context, we can make wiser choices about how we respond. And I use that word respond versus react. So you've heard this before, right? Reaction is, that's kind of what the neighbors were doing. Good, bad, good, bad. Whereas the farmer, no, let me just think about this for a minute. And he decides consciously how he wants to respond. Now, how do we keep this bigger perspective as we go through the changes in our lives? Well, one thing that can really help is to just have a little bit better sense of what's really happening to us when we're going through a transition in our lives, so we know a little bit more what to expect. And when I use the word transition, I use it very purposefully, because in this talk, I'm not talking about like the little changes that come and go every day, the little things that kind of hit you in the face, the traffic jam on the way to work, or sleeping through your alarm, or missing an appointment, or those sort of the unexpected snowstorm. I'm talking about the big things that kind of rock your world. Those things that feel a little bit like an earthquake when they hit. It could be the loss of a loved one. It could be losing your job. It could be a health challenge. It could be stepping into live in a new city. It could be moving back to live in an old city. It could be looking for a new home for your church. It could be a divorce. All these are the sorts of transitions in our lives that just shake us up. And not only do they shake us up, but they cause us to feel a lot of emotion. We can feel grief and anger and fear and all these emotions because we feel like life is kind of out of control. And not only that, we don't really know who we are in that situation. It's like, wait now, how's it going to be? How's it going to be now that I don't have that career, or I don't live in that city, or I don't have that friend who moved away? So we're in that kind of adjustment, going through tremendous emotion at the same time as we're trying to adjust to some big change in our lives. I remember in 1992 when I was going through my divorce, and I remember telling a friend, I feel like somebody has taken my life and torn it into a million pieces and thrown it up in the air. And I still remember exactly how that felt. Here I was the mother of 2 little kids, so now I'm a single mom, right? And I felt like my whole vision, my whole view of what my life was going to be had changed. And so I'm thinking, what's it going to be like now? How am I going to survive? How's this going to be? And who am I in the midst of all of it? It just kind of does that, wow, turns your whole world upside down. Anybody here experience something like that? Well, heck yeah. And it's because of the love and the support that we get from our friends and our families, and maybe a counselor from spiritual community like this, that we're able to get through it and come out the other side. And the silver lining to my story is I'm married to Richard now, and I'm very blessed. But change can be very, very frightening for us. I remember seeing once a tip jar on the counter of by the cash register of a coffee shop, and it said, "Fear change? Leave it here." And I thought, if only we could. Because at a minimum, when we undergo a major change like this, it just sort of throws us off balance. But at a maximum, at its very worst, it freaks us out. One of the big changes that we all go through, we share the journey, the adventure of aging, right? The different phases of aging. And this is something I'm particularly facing right now with my mother, who's 86 years old. And it's been absolutely shocking to me, how fast her memory has declined. Just, what happened? But the other day I heard a little story that made me realize, oh, she's not the only person this happens to. And it kind of lightened my mood about it, so I'm going to share it with you. So it seems there were two elderly women who were driving in the car on their way to church. And the woman in the passenger seat became alarmed when her friend drove right through an intersection without stopping at the stop sign. And she gasped when she did it a second time. And when she did it a third time, the woman couldn't stand it anymore, and she screamed, "Harriet, do you realize that you're driving through stop signs?" To which Harriet replied, "I'm driving?" Not quite that bad, but it almost feels that way sometimes, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, the point is that when we're going through this, it's very disorienting. Just like those ladies, we're a little bit disoriented. We may lose a sense of who we are in the process. If I'm not that young person, if I'm not that woman with a sharp memory, who am I? Back when I lived in Portland, Oregon, I had the pleasure of working with a CEO there for a while of a major company. And this guy was so highly respected in the community. I mean, he was like one of the leading citizens of Portland and just did all these magnificent things for the city. And I happened to be working with him and around him at the time that he retired. And so about 6 months after he retired, I happened to bump into him on the street. And you know, you always think people are just loving their retirement, right? I said, "Hey, how's it going? How are you liking it?" And he knew me well enough to be candid. When he looked at me, his eyes got a little misty. And he said, "I don't know who I am now. I don't know who I am." Wow. You know, if we identify with our job or our position or our status or whatever, that becomes who we know ourselves to be. And so we have to recalibrate when that's not there anymore. You know, the fact is that any major transition like this feels like a death. And when you think about it, it is a death. It is, because it's a death to the way things used to be. And I'm not really sure that that comparison to death brings us a whole lot of comfort, because if we are afraid of change, we're way more afraid of death. You know, I've always loved what Woody Allen said when somebody said to him, "Woody, what would you like people to say about you at your funeral?" And he said, "Look, he's breathing." Woody, yeah. You know, we don't want to face death. But the good news here is that death may be the end to the old, but it's also the precursor to the new, isn't it? Sure, it's the cycle of life. You know, we see this throughout the Bible. We see the Israelites wandering through the desert for 40 years, for heaven's sakes. And then where do they land? The promised land. Yeah. You know, you see it even in the story of Jesus, the crucifixion followed by the resurrection. And this is the important thing to remember, particularly as you're going through a major transition, that in the middle of this experience, there's a seed in there. There's a seed for transformation. That new little sprout is already taking hold in you. That new possibility that's going to burst forth into your new life. And even in your darkest hour, you can know on some level that that's happening inside of you. You can have that little bit of faith that something wonderful is going to come even from this. How many of you have either experienced yourself or know someone who has found unity or perhaps a different spiritual path from having experienced a dark night of the soul? Anybody? Yeah. They went down to the very bottom, but that energy in there, that God energy directing them on, they found their way on the other side and came out with an even stronger sense of who they were and what they wanted out of life. In his book, Finding Yourself in Transition, has anybody ever read this book by Robert Brummett? Fabulous book. He says, transition may be an uncomfortable time, yet it is always a meaningful time. Though painful, these can be extremely significant times in our life. Times of transition are wonderful opportunities to gain strength and wisdom, opportunities to experience spiritual breakthroughs and healings. Transition may provide the breakthrough necessary to live an entirely different life, not just the old life in a new way, but an entirely new life. If you need further inspiration for that, think about the caterpillar in his little chrysalis. Wow, what he was has come to a complete end, and there he is in that chrysalis upside down, and what is this going on here? But what's happening? He's turning into a butterfly. And so are you. So I imagine at this point you're thinking, oh, well, that's all very nice on a philosophical level, but what am I supposed to do that I'm facing this particular situation in my life right now? So let me give you a few ideas. And the first one is to keep that bigger perspective. To remember the farmer so that you can also, even if you're experiencing pain or confusion or fear, you can still reserve just a little bit of judgment that maybe so, maybe not. Right? And even know with that core of faith in you that good's going to come from this. You know, the shining example of this is Myrtle Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, who advised people, if you're going through a very, very difficult time, she said, be grateful in advance for the good you know will come from this. Wow. Does that just blow you away? That idea that even when you're in your most difficult time, you can still already be giving thanks for the good you know will come from it. Absolutely. And the second thing that we can do when we're undergoing tremendous change is really kind of what I was at least trying to share with the children, which is what I like to call the power of the pause. Because a pause can be hugely powerful. It can make all the difference in the world. And what I'm suggesting here is that when life is coming at you fast, or when you're feeling kind of like the neighbors and you're a little bit off your game or you're stirred up, create a little space for yourself. It only takes a minute. Step out of that situation through a pause. And in that pause, what you're going to do is take 3 conscious, slow breaths. 3 breaths. We're going to practice it right now. So here's what I want you to do. Close your eyes for a moment. Bring to mind, even briefly, whatever situation you're facing right now in your life that's causing you some stress. And now I want you to imagine yourself just taking a step back from it. And we're going to breathe. 1 deep breath in. Ready? In. And let it go. And again, deep breath in. And let it go. One more time, and let's really be conscious of breathing in the presence of God. Breathe in. And let it go. Now you can open your eyes again. Hopefully you feel a little different. Just a little present you can give yourself at any time, in any place. So these are my suggestions for how to move through times of transition. And the last one I offer to you, make this a time that you discover how to be your own best friend. I think a lot of us know pretty well how to be our own worst enemy, right? Negative self-talk, all that stuff. When you're going through a major transition, this is the time to really turn it on in terms of being good to yourself in ways that are important, watching your nutrition, taking good care of your body, getting extra rest when you can, being with friends or people who make you happy, spending time in a spiritual community that can remind you the truth of who you really are, that I am consciousness. You're not this stuff on the outside. And not only that, but this I am consciousness is going to see you through. So my wish for all of you as you find yourself in transition, and I'll bet every single one of you is going through some kind of transition right now, so my wish for you is that the rough places will be made smooth, that you'll remember how that farmer related to change and keep a bigger perspective. May you say yes to what is whispering in your soul and step forward with confidence toward a new doorway. And may you know that God is with you every step of the way. And God bless you, each and every one.